hello, and welcome to the Comedian's Paradise. This is the podcast where we speak to mavericks of the clown and comedy world. And
Yeah.
today's guest, exactly. We got the cowboys, we got the Indians, we got the Hell's Angels of the clown and comedy world. And today's guest is none other than a unique and amazing talent and teacher and clown aficionado called Johnny Melville. We just had a discussion about his name possibly becoming from an explorer or from the Norwegians coming in and taking over the world. He
No,
had
not the Norwegians, the Normans.
the Normans, sorry, Normans, not Norwegians.
Normandy, Le
Normandy.
Normandy.
Well, yeah, no, the Norman.
1066, the last time England was invaded.
Yes, so he got his name from when England was invaded in 1066, and it's been transferred from generations to generations. Please welcome a man who, with Jango Edwards, helped revolutionize clown in the 70s. Please welcome Johnny, like Johnny Bravo, Melville.
Dun, 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 dun. Hello there, everybody. Welcome to my little world.
And also a very famous voiceover artist as well. Okay, so
I have done a few, yes. Once upon a time in an old castle.
Kane, a monster who kidnapped two, a comedian and a clown on a podcast.
And now there's a good start to a story. Yeah, exactly.
So
Stand
Johnny,
up,
tell us.
sit down.
Oh, okay. What was that? I missed that bit. It
Stand up,
wasn't
sit down, fall down, stand up, sit down, fall down.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they call it that. I think why not just do stand up in the shed or something, or just sitting down. You could do
Well,
something.
I've been asked questions like, "Do you do stand up?" And I say, "Depends who I'm with." But also, it's I often say I'm a fall down, and then people get very confused. And I
That's
like confusion because people are usually conditioned to yes, no, dankeschön, bitteschön. You know, this whole kind of series of questions that people ask, like, hey man, where are you from, man? So I usually say I'm from that constellation, pointing up to the sky. And I prefer people to go, oh, that's different, than just coming out with the normal kind of riff-raff stuff. So I usually, in terms of comedy and clown, I call myself an energy sculptor because I find the word clown is a bad word. It has too many associations in English for people who think, for actors, for example, because generally actors think that clowns are like, oh, you can't do anything else but I had once a famous response, and somebody said, well, what do you do, Johnny, in the party? And I said, well, actually, in the days when I thought clown was cool, that's a word. And I said, this was in London, probably 75 or something. And I said, yeah, I'm a clown. And this person sort of went, oh, I'm so sorry, and left. I thought, well, that's a really nice, encouraging number there. So I didn't actually like clowns when I was a kid. I found them pretty boring and often something to fill in the time, between the big acts and the circus, for example. And I remember this guy, Coco the Clown. He was a big thing. I don't know if you've heard of him, but in my generation, all those years ago, Coco the Clown was the clown in England. I mean, he was everywhere. And he had this big green suit and funny kind of bald head on it. Was all painted, and over the top clown. And he basically didn't really do anything that made me laugh or even make me interested. So I wasn't really a fan of the clown. But when I started clowning, it wasn't my intention, but I ended up suddenly finding myself in a situation where I was clowning. And I realized that the word clown is quite a dirty word in England. And now in America, of course, it's even more dirty because you have horror clowns, and you actually have real dangerous people walking around being clowns, which I can't think of anything more disgusting, really. Of all the people that they decide to emulate, clown is really unfair. Terrible. So anyway, Django Edwards came up with the phrase nouveau clown, which means a little bit more advanced and it's got an exotic French flavor, But I still prefer energy sculpture because I do healing as well, and I sing. I have a Spotify page and stuff like that. So I've noticed that if people say, "Oh, I thought you were a clown," and it's like, well, I'm allowed to do films even if I'm a clown, surely. But that doesn't really go. So I usually say I'm an energy sculptor. And then once people get through that little block of what is that exactly, I say it's me sculpting energy in front of you and with you and around me and with me. And that's my word I use for doing what I do, which is various extensions of my madness.
Hmm. That's quite an interesting thing when the two things you said that are interesting, like energy sculptor. I mean, but it's also links into, does it link into what you said before? Is you like to put people in a position where they don't know what to say? Because when they ask you that question, they're trying to put you in a box and try and find out
Yeah.
who you are. But when you do that, you're finding out who the other person is by how they react to your response to that question.
I like people to break out of their programs or realize that they have programs. And almost everybody has a program, which has been instilled in different ways, whether it's parents or church or school or competitors or whatever it is. There are various programs, and I think it's great to be able to break out of a program and come up with another inventive idea, so that the imagination can spark. And imagination is generally what one needs, I think, to get through life, either for yourself or for other people to deal with, so that imagination is something which we can live with. And I think nowadays, some people suffer from lack of imagination, or they've been told that you're the things your imagination, say at school time or at home. And then people tend to dampen their imagination like it's some kind of evil thing, to have. Maybe that's why AI is taking over a lot of people's lives, because nobody's blocking the AI imagination. They go, "Oh yeah, and AI did it all for me. It was great." But actually, what about ours? Our imagination is much more important. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not really based in a satanic or a dark form, which our imagination, I think, is much more pure.
And how does that? So how did you? When did? How has sort of theatre and performing, from what you've seen from like live performing, been affected over the years since this? So you and Django Edwards, like you were very revolutionary in what you did as performers, but how have things changed since then? Like, how did you get in? Did you
Well,
revolutionize performing?
Django came from America and he arrived in London, and I more or less came from Edinburgh at the same time, within months. And I eventually heard about this guy with a bunch of hippies, American and some English hippies. Um, and I had a group which started with an Italian mime, and we started working at the same, more or less the same year, and I'd been working with experimental theatre in London already before that actually happened. So I think theatre in those days, after the hippie time, there was a huge new opening for many, many people, because up till then, theatre was in theaters, and what started in the period of the 70s, when I was working in Edinburgh, and also I was also doing theatre. I was actually school teaching for 2 years as a job, but I was doing a lot of experimental theatre at the same time. And so what happened was that there was all this other possibility going on, which you didn't have to be in a theatre or part of a theatre group or a repertory group. you could do your own thing. And it was primitive, and it was sort of pioneering. But things gradually opened out and broadened out, and suddenly theatre ended up in prisons, or ended up in the streets, or ended up in hospitals, or in old people's homes, kids, youth clubs. I mean, all various and new sort of situations where sometimes uh, the audiences didn't know you were coming, and of course the street is the most extreme, because the street is full of people in their own territory, public territory, and suddenly there's somebody, doing something in the street, which means you have to either stop or get out of the way of, or whatever it is. It's confrontation sometimes. So all of these moments were a learning process for many people at that time. And gradually, certainly in London, between 73 and 78, there was a lot of stuff which happened in London. And there was like Labour had it had its prime minister then, but there was a lot of experimental stuff going on before Margaret Thatcher arrived. And when Mrs. Thatcher arrived, everything just stopped basically, because she cut money for education and culture. And then it went to more the old style, which was Covent Garden, and so on and so on. So I left London 79, 6 months after she got in. But before that, in the 70s, there was a huge amount of stuff going on, which I worked in Camberwell, for example, on a alternative to prisons project, and that was doing role play with video. And they were given a choice. These guys, and when the judge said, "You're guilty, and you're either going to go to jail, or we have a project that you can try." And these people were recidivist prisoners, so they were used to going back to jail. And the idea was to bring culture and different views into their lives as an alternative to going to prison and having, themselves to look after in the prison, which basically, of course, there was no responsibility. You just sat in a jail, and then you got fed by lunch and dinner and breakfast. And you went out into it was just a kind of routine. So these people did a 3-month course, and I was one of the people working. And what happened was that there were some difficult, hairy moments, with one or two heavy prisoners, but generally it worked. And the probation service were part of it. And so the probation service also worked with me. And I had to do workshops with the probation service to loosen them up and show them what I would do with these people. So it was a lot of very exciting days, actually. But going back to the idea of the clown thing, Jango had a lot of similar experience in America before that. And when we arrived on this London scene, he left for Amsterdam more or less 2 years after I was there. And it took me another 4 or 5 years to actually move out. Actually, I moved away when Thatcher came in. Like I said, I went to Frankfurt. And so Jango was in Amsterdam then, and I was in Frankfurt. Then we kind of revolutionized stuff in Holland. Was already taking a lot of groups from England, a lot of the theatre, young theatre groups that were happening, like Freehold, People's Show, John Bull Puncture Repair Outfit. There were Bath Natural Theatre. There were some really amazing groups in these early days. And they were all experimenting and trying new things that were kind of weird, offbeat, crazy. Foots Barn Theatre was doing Shakespeare in a tent, in a traveling tent. So there was a lot of excitement about what we were all coming together and doing without really planning anything, or I never actually worked with Jango. Apart from impro or just trying something together in the street, that kind of thing. It was very loose. But I think theatre now has gone. There's a kind of revival in some ways, but theatre now is it's suffered because of the net. You know, now everybody's got a brand, so there's a sort of personal branding. There's a lot of stuff which is not really theatre. You know, there's a lot of distractions now that people get lost in. Theatre itself, mm, there are, I think in the 90s, certainly in Germany, the influence of Margaret Thatcher finally arrived in the theaters there and in the theater festivals in Germany. And her main thing was that she thought that government shouldn't look after culture, and it should be industry and business.
Hmm.
So gradually that kind of changed, because in Europe, I mean, Europe was fantastic in the 80s, all the 80s, there was tons and tons of work, tons of money. There was so much work. It was just fantastic. I mean, I don't know. I went from playing silly shows in small theaters in England, like maybe getting £25, and then within a year, I was getting £2,000 a show, and then eventually 5,000 marks, Deutschmarks. So it was another world. It was theater that was functioning, but actually with respect for the artists, And I couldn't believe, I'd start throwing prices out just to see what they'd say, and they'd go, okay, okay. It was crazy. And in London or in England, it stayed the same kind of price, more or less, for
Oh,
through the 80s.
is it still the same sort of thing now, would you say? Because I know that in stand-up, they say that comedy, for a lot of stand-ups, and this is disclosure, um, payment, especially in London, hasn't really gone up since the 90s. It has,
I believe that, yeah.
in the north, they pay a bit more because the stand-up scene's a bit newer over there than it is in the south. Because I think the
Mm.
south has got to start with the alternative comedy, and the payment hasn't really improved since the 90s. But do you think that's the same sort of thing now that Europe probably pays a bit more than the UK in that sort of?
Oh, I think definitely there's no doubt that there's a different respect, you know. Um, I noticed in Holland when I was touring there in like 74, 75 with my group, Select a Balloon Band and then later Caboodle. But we'd see posters, if we played in like youth clubs were a very big thing there, and then later in theaters themselves. But the first years were more like youth clubs and Amsterdam kind of late clubs, the kind of marijuana clubs, if you like, and all these kind of young places that had money given to them by the cities for cultural entertainment or for cultural learning. So there were workshops and shows. And for example, there'd be posters, for somebody like Jeff Beck, this famous guitar player. And my name would be on the same level as Jeff Beck, on the poster. Like tomorrow, Wednesday will be Jeff Beck, Thursday, Johnny Melville, Friday, another famous performer, in terms of English or American recognition. But in Holland and Germany, the posters were equal. So I suddenly had this elevated status, to being equal with Jeff Beck, which was very kind of bizarre at the time.
Did you? What was okay? That was. And would you be doing like 20 minutes, or would it be like a full hour, or?
No, it was usually an hour. I mean, I did sometimes
Oh,
2 hour shows, an hour and a half to 2 hours.
bloody hell! 1 hour, 2 hours. Poof.
Yeah, yeah. And then that's why also moved into theaters, because theaters were also looking for that kind of length, because then they could present me for the evening. And sometimes it was, other festivals, they came and said, okay, we want you to do a cabaret on the last day. with all the artists in the cabaret, you know, for example. And so that would, and Django often was in the same festival. So often we did a cabaret number together. Sometimes we improvised something, Blues Brothers like, you know, which was maybe with a, I mean, it was always a rock band. Usually I always had one or two musicians, keyboards, and sometimes a violin or a sax player or something. So we could easily put together a big band as well, you know, with all the musicians that were there too. So, and there were also musicians from also doing kind of fun music. So they would also be in the festival anyway, which wasn't necessarily clown, but it was offbeat, bizarre entertainment, you know, which was called musical clown sometimes.
And how did it used to go? Did it go like one, like you or Django would go in, I don't know, interact with the crowd? I mean, in a stand-up show, what we do, we'll get someone to interact with the crowd and say, "Oh, hello, sir. What do you do for a living? Oh, you're wearing baggy trousers. You got glasses like Harry Potter. You're dressed very like an office suit. Are you Harry Potter mated with an office person? Oh, and you got a lovely girlfriend there. Is that your wife? Is that your girlfriend? Is she wearing a curtain
Mm,
today? What's
mm.
happened? Did you find her from like the the Sound of Music?" And they'll go and, "Oh, what's your relationship? How do you meet?" And there's a lot of interaction. The comedian would tell a
Probably,
few jokes to warm the crowd up, and
yeah,
then once
yeah.
they got them warm, they start introducing the acts. How does it
Well,
work?
probably the main difference would be that we would be in the theater. We'd be on there, we'd be sitting on them, or we'd be pulling them up on the stage, or it would be a different form, completely different form. So it would be more theatrical, which we both Django came more from vaudeville, kind of new vaudeville stuff, which is more connected to the cabaret kind of style. And I came from very theatrical background because I was into theater and I've been doing a lot of theater in different ways. So it's a much more theatrical thing. And the stand-up thing, I mean, I did stand-up in my shows as a character in my show. So he would relate to the audience. I mean, I did a show called Members Only, which was members only, which was about private clubs and sperm banks, because you know to do a sperm bank you have to have a member. So it was a story like that. And the punk character, Lucky Sunday, he was a guy from Glasgow, and Lucky had I had him three times do a stand-up routine with the audience, but it was within the structure of the performance.
Oh,
So it was not me doing a stand-up routine with other stand-ups. It was me performing a stand-up piece as a sketch. And that was, for me, that was more, it was more valuable, I think, for an audience because they could relate to the story, and it gave a background to the character. It gave a, you know, another dimension, if you like, to what the story could be. It's a bit like a voiceover in a movie, you know, and the guy says, "I didn't know I was going to be attacked by a beautiful woman," you know, that kind of thing in the movies, you know. So, and then you get a flashback to the situation. So I was doing kind of movies on stage with no props, no, just with mime and music from my musician, and lots of character work with voice.
but
And
did oh, okay. And was it in any English? Was there any English spoken, or is it just all like with voiceovers and all like sounds and just
no,
mime?
no, it was a full theatre piece. I mean, I talk like that. What are you doing? I don't know. Well, you better start knowing because I've no idea what you're doing. I don't know either. Anyway, I'm here tonight with Marvin. Oh, you know Marvin. So it would be that kind of thing. And so I would have a story, and the characters would have to convey certain things to get to the next scene. But I also improvised every time. So there was always new jokes coming in because I was just improvising with the energy of who was there.
And
And
what?
Django also built his sketches in the same kind of way, very much going out there, knowing what we had to do, but making up a lot of stuff at the time. And then gradually it kind of slotted into into more and more of a piece. That's why I ended up doing 2 hours, because I had just, tons of material that came from my own kind of inventions at the time. Much for me, much better than coming out with I'm going to tell this joke and that joke, and for me it was much more free, and because it was theatrical, the audience uh, they were kind of pushed into listening to a story or watching a story, which is a different kind of thing from going, because with stand up, people get drunk and then they go, I'm going to fuck him up, I'm going to see what I can do with this guy, and there's all that heckling stuff.
Did you get
I
any
don't
of
know.
that when you did the shows? Did you get anyone heckling, let's say,
Oh yeah,
the
sure.
stage or boo?
I mean, in especially in England. I mean, in England, there was always smart guys, and I used to do when I was working for before I moved to Holland. We did lots and lots and lots around London, especially, and then also like we had a week in Southampton, or we had a week in Newcastle, or we'd have to go to a hospital in Prudhoe in near Newcastle, or up to Edinburgh for a week up there, that kind of thing. So we started getting those kind of offers from cities. But I remember one night I think it was in Camberwell or in Deptford, maybe one of these places in South London, and I did this straitjacket number. And fortunately, I had a straitjacket mentor in Battersea, and he taught me a lot of stuff. Otherwise, I would have been screwed in this show. But he said to me, you're going to find a lot of people in pubs and bars get really upset, and they like to fuck people over, especially guys in bars, and especially somebody doing a Superman stuff, which is straitjacket work. So I did the straitjacket, and I asked, I saw these two big guys, and they came over, and I knew immediately they were military, and they had it, they love screwing guys up who think they're so it's a kind of a test. They'll say, okay, you want to do this sketch? You're going to get me to help you, or you're going to suffer. So they put me in this thing, and instead of, I felt it immediately. I knew I was done. So fortunately, I had this guy told me in Battersea, he said, okay, Johnny, if it does happen, what they'll do is they'll tie you an extra tie, and they won't let you be able to do what you normally do. So if you have to, then he showed me more or less how to do it. But I'd never had it before, and I'd been doing it 2 years, pretty easily, with people impressed and all this stuff. So I watched these two guys, and I saw the glint in their eye, and they realized that I knew that they'd got me. So it wasn't I don't know what it would be like. It must be terrible if a guy gets in that situation and can't get out. It's a failure, and ooh, God, the audience would be just like, boo, fuck off, get out of here. So anyway, it took me 25 minutes, and the more I took, the more the audience was getting hotter. And when I eventually got out, and I was absolutely exhausted, because you have to contort your body into all kinds of ways. Um, my body was painful for about 3 days, with muscle pain and my shoulders, my neck, it was terrible. And I got out, and the whole pub got on their feet, and they were on the table, and the military came over and they put me on their shoulders. I mean, it was classic kind of conquering the situation, meeting the challenge, you could say.
Yeah, yeah.
So there were all these kind of situations, and sometimes I mean, I always used audience, especially girls, because I love girls, and so I had a motorbike sketch, which was a mime sketch, and I'd bring up some pretty cool chick, and then and then really what the clown form of comedy is, it's to introduce play and try and get the people to play like kids, because that's really what clown is. Clown is going back to be a child and remembering those days when you were sort of at your auntie's party and all the adults would be sitting blabbing, but you're down in the floor with some other kids and doing the most bizarre kind of fantasy game, whether it was cowboy and Indians or doctors or whatever it was. there's a level of rediscovering that childhood kind of innocence, or not. I mean, it could also be not all kids are innocent, but generally there's an innocence. But is that level of play, and some people are ready to play, if you bring them up. I mean, I still do that sketch. Still checking out young cute girls in my age, but uh, it's still great because when people respond in the way that I'm playing, then they join the play and they become a clown as well, without the
Mm.
kind of paranoia of embarrassment or whatever it might be. Sometimes they get embarrassed, sure, but generally, uh, the motive behind it is to get people to play again without worrying, have I got the right color of shirt on, or all that kind of stuff.
Ooh. Well, it's w- one thing I want to also ask you. Like the Edinburgh Fringe is world famous, and there's all sorts.
Mm.
I'm saying, so the thing that really amazes me and surprises me is that you did the show for 2 hours. I've only had one show that I've watched at that amount of time where I've not gotten bored, and that is with a very controversial and dodgy comic. I know that a lot of people don't like him, and I may keep my daughter away from him if I ever saw him. But Louis C.K. is a very good comic, and for 2 hours he was able to keep me entertained. I watched another comic and I got like Doug Stanhope, and he made me fall asleep after 45 minutes. And the thing that I'm saying is like with I'm a terrible audience member, Johnny. I've fallen asleep at sometimes at comedy shows, even though I'm a comedian myself. But the thing is, how do you manage to keep and entertain someone's attention for that amount of time? I mean, is it because with clowning, it's a bit like you're going on a roller coaster together? It's more participative, you're having fun. While stand up can be a bit more distance. It's a bit like maybe you're on a date or something. You're trying to say the right
Um,
line or right thing to get the audience to laugh. Whilst it's more, with clowning, you're more together.
yeah, I think there are certain groups of audiences which will dictate how a show goes, and the stand-up circuits are generally, um, stand-up audience is generally drunk, or at least, half drunk and willing to get drunker as they enjoy the night, you know. So I think therefore, you're not going to be well, I don't know actually if many kids go to stand up anymore, but I think it's hard for kids to be in stand up. And the great thing about the clown shows is that the I've had adult shows with 2,000 people in a theater easily without any problem, but sometimes there are kids, because the kids it he let's go and see the clown kind of thing. So it's a family who comes, maybe three kids or something, but they will always be entertaining also for the audience because they understand whatever they get on their level, which is sometimes more honest even than what the audience gets as an adult on a certain level, because audience obviously, okay, well, let's see what this technique is, whatever somebody might come with that kind of approach. Generally, if you play in a Spanish village, the audience is coming to really have fun. And so they're going to be open anyway for whatever I come up with. Um, I don't think, I mean, I've had older ladies walk out in big theaters in Holland, because in those kind of theaters, they come to see, they buy a ticket for the season, and so they can come with their 500 guilders or whatever it is, their 500 euros, whatever they pay, they'll see maybe 20 shows or 30 shows or something in the year. And sometimes they have, a different show a night. So they'll come and see, and anybody who's famous in Holland, like a Hans Dufferdaffer, and he's doing his songs, he's famous on TV. So everybody will come and see Hans Dufferdaffer, for example.
Mm.
And but then sometimes they have outside guys like me coming in for a show, and I have a following as well, of course. But I've seen three old ladies going out because maybe because they don't speak all the English or they don't really get what I'm doing. And nowadays it doesn't happen so much because I'm the same age as them. So there's a kind of identification. But the younger people don't walk out because I'm still doing things which are about play. And I think play is such an important thing because most people, um, that's why older people end up being like a kid's audience because they're not doing jobs anymore. They're retired or they're sitting at home, doing whatever they do, reading books and newspapers or TV or whatever. So when they go out and they see something happening which is kind of not intellectual or academic or whatever, their reactions are much more like a kid's audience. And it's like the rediscovery of the child for many older people. And that's why it's really nice to play for older people sometimes.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know. I think about the boredom thing. I think it's a matter of really what people present, And I usually present enough offbeat stuff to make people go, "Oh, this is different." For example, I mean, members only, for example, about that story about the sperm banks and I mean, I had your classic bad person, Sir Henry Blemish, who had a kind of arm problem like this, kept getting stuck. And he was, yeah, Henry Blemish, yeah, and lucky someday met a professor who was that big because he got reduced in a chemical accident that he was experimenting with chimpanzees, and so he ended up getting reduced. So I had this character that Lucky carried around all the time on his hand, and then he'd be there. My name's Professor Murphy. What do you think, Lucky? I don't know, Professor. So I'd be talking like this, and people, because it's not some kind of thing that you normally see, unless it's in maybe a animation film or something. Um, People go, "Wow, that's different." And I'd present the characters with a lot of speed so that they didn't have time to kind of there'd be no delays. I'd move fast with the characters, and most theater works that way. You have to have pace. You can't let an audience go to sleep, for example, any time in a theater. So theater pieces are always upbeat, and I think I realized around the end of the 70s that I'd been performing at a high metabolic rate. And when I was young, I'd been watching Chaplin and Buster Keaton, on BBC Sunday afternoons or whatever. And they were doing speeded up um, silent movies. So actually, I took on this speed from the silent movies, I think, and I didn't actually realize it until later. So people used to say, "God, you're so fast, sometimes I can't keep up, what I'm doing." And I'd go, "Yeah, but well, can't you?" I thought everybody. But then I realized I was doing direct from silent movie work, which, of course, is speed up movies.
Okay.
So I think
Okay.
I think that's one of the reasons is that I worked at a fast pace and I don't let people go to sleep. And if somebody's go to sleep, I'll go down and jump on them or bring them up, you know. Uh, I've done that with TV cameras. I've done it with somebody who thought they were going to get an easy 30 minute film. I'd walk down Italy. I've done it lots of times. I'm not going to do anything more. If you don't, you tell, I get people to the audience and say, "Why are you letting this person stand in front of you? He's taking photographs. Did you make a deal with this guy to do that?" And I'd sort of, audiences, wake up, don't let these things happen. You know
Hmm.
what photographers are like? They'll just go, "Yeah, the great pic," in front, and people kind of going like this. I go, "You can't do that. Get out."
Hmm. And when you're doing a clown show and doing clown pieces, I mean,
Mhm.
the one thing that I like about stand up, and one thing that's really good about it is it's quite easy, especially in the big city, to perform a lot and to sort of sharpen an idea or a joke till it
Mhm.
becomes funny in a lot of different places.
Sure.
So easy to find places to perform. How does it work with clown? Because stand up's so easy to set up. I've seen with theatre shows, like you've got the lighting right, you've got to have all these different things in place, and with that, maybe this is me being daft, but I feel that you don't get to. It's not as easy to find places to perform as regularly to iron things out. So how do you iron things out
Well,
to get to that?
I mean, at the beginning, when on the level I'm on, I can work quite in big space. I can get theaters or whatever if I want to do a tour or something like that. But I mean, at the beginning, we were
Yeah.
we were performing on spaces that were maybe like a stand-up stage, and I'd present the whole show. Doing a mime, I just meant I couldn't run around in the same way. I'd have to do everything much smaller, or if it was outside, sometimes it was a huge space, and I'd have to find a way of bringing it down so it was smaller for people to relate to. So, I mean, that was part of the learning, the curve of every night could have been a different situation completely, and that I reveled in that kind of challenge because it was always different, and the audiences too, sometimes I remember once in London, we were touring old people's homes I had a horse and cart. Uh, I got an old tinker, and I got money from Wandsworth to pay him, and whatever. We had a special thing, and one of the places we went to was an old people's home, and we went in there that day, with the usual kind of energy, and then somebody told us that one of their friends, had just died that morning. So it was like, oh my God, we just walked in on somebody dying, and we're going, isn't it life fun and happy? And so we had to kind of, it was like, well, oh, okay, we do it, and show respect and so on. I mean, I remember that we had to change our attitude from this kind of madness and life is great, isn't it? And then realizing that one of their friends. And of course, as soon as one of their friends is gone, then they're all going, I wonder what it'll be like when I go, So there was all that level of inner turmoil going on. And we went in very quietly and started, and then we got into gear as they started to smile, and then they could move into, laughter eventually. But it took 10, 15 minutes of kind of well walking on eggshells, like I said, because sometimes you have to do that with somebody in a situation. um I've worked with all kinds of bizarre audiences, like in Austria once we did a show for hairdressers, 40 hairdressers, and they had this hairdressing course. And I was touring in Austria at the time, and then they said to me, "Hey, would you come and do a show for?" So I set up some funny gags for hairdressers, which was very, very. We both had long wigs, my musician and I, and then I did a thing about cutting his hair. So there was lots of gags I had, and one of the things I pulled out instead of a hair dryer, I pulled out an electric drill, you know. And then we dry the hair, and I sort of put the drill like I was going to stick it in his head. And they were like, no, stop, stop, because they thought I'd made a mistake.
Hmm. That's brilliant. Oh no, no, no! Please, no! It's starting again. That's it. Oh, for fuck's sake! Bloody hell!
Politically. There's always something going on that I can include, or a football game or a local, um, maybe there's a cup final or something, happening in the week. There's always something I can use. And once in the middle of a German village, and how would I know that this happened? Because I ask people, I say, what's going on? Is there anything scandalous here? Anything funny that's going on? And then I hear something, or it's a cliche thing. Maybe there's a gold mine, and somebody died there once or lost their money or something. There's always something that you can include, and that's probably the same for stand up. Robin Williams I saw once, and that was the best thing I've ever seen on stand up stage. It was just the way he got on stage in San Francisco, and this friend of mine who used to work with him in improv in the Chicago days, he ran into me because I was in the bar next door, and he said, "Johnny, come in. Robin's here." So I went running through, and he was just getting on the stage because he said, "This is really boring, everybody. Anybody want to see me?" And of course, everybody went, "Yeah." So this poor guy, this poor comedian, sort of went off to the side, and Robin Williams came on, and he did 25 minutes, and he was like, "Okay, give me a thing, give me a suggestion, give me a theme." And they'd be like, the White House. And then he'd do blah, 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 all these gags about the White House. And then he'd go something else. And then people were just shouting things out, mainly to do with American politics, but not all, some drugs too and things. And he was just like on fire, you know, fire, absolute fire.
Mm.
That
So
was the best thing I've ever seen on stage, and for comedy.
he is,
Without,
he is an, yeah, I've seen bits of him interact with people. I think him and Jim Carrey, some of the best performers you could ever see. However, I will say one thing about Robin Williams. He's also well known for stealing jokes. No.
well, I think there's definitely, Charlie Chaplin did that all the time, because he was in the theater circuits. He knew all the gags from the theater people, but not everybody was in the movie. The movie would
Ah,
make it famous.
but it's a no. I mean, it's. I think your answer to what I said before is if you're going to find a way to get the if it matters to you. I feel that what you said there, if it matters to you, you're going to find a way of getting the rehearsal or the things needed to polish your bits up. And
Yeah, and I think that's how also you can use audiences is to try stuff out. If your show is going well and it's people are enjoying it, you can try something. You can throw something in which maybe isn't completely ready. I did that with mime sometimes. I ended up improvising because of being with an audience. It used to put the pressure on me to make sure I could be there all the time, and that's why I did a lot of improv. And with improv, uh, I worked with in England. I worked with Omelette Broadcasting Company, Jim Sweeney, Steve Steen. Have you heard of those guys? They were on BBC a lot in in the 90s, especially, and beginning of 2000. And they played in the Comedy Store too a lot. But uh, when you work with impro, you have to finish, whatever you're doing, you have to finish it somehow. You have to get to the end of the improv. And that's really good because that's why people like improv because it's there's a tension, that you don't really know if they're going to make it funny or make it to the end. Which is what makes improv exciting. But the only trouble with improv for me is that it's become a sport. You kind of win and all that kind of stuff. I don't really like that stuff, but that's a side to it. That's going to happen, I guess. Um, I think, and I know that you mentioned also you mentioned the thing about film. How do you bring that kind of learning into, I think for me, what mime does is that it sets up the body. Um, you learn things, but then you integrate them. And when you integrated them, then it becomes a very unconscious act of character building or defining emotion within the moment. And that's, I mean, one of my favorite performers is Emil Volk, who lives now in Australia. I don't think he's performing. He's probably doing stuff there, but nothing. He's not touring. But he was with People Show, and Mike Figgis, who is a famous film director now, he did Leaving Las Vegas. Mike Figgis was part of People Show, and that was one of my favorite groups at the time. But Emil did. His father was an opera singer and he studied opera, but he also studied mime with Decroux, Etienne Decroux. And when he went onto the stage, and everything was integrated. He did, he immediately used all the mime things as an extension of himself, and it created a power, a certain kind of power that only the clown had that really. And if you say, okay, you're an old man of 70, everybody sort of goes like this with a walking stick. It's a kind of cliche thing. But you wouldn't get that from a guy of 70. It would be a different effect. It's more about the state, estado, the state of the person, as opposed to what the cliche idea is, how they function. I mean, I'm well over 70, but I never have a stick, for example, and my shoulders are kind of down. So I don't fit the cliche of that idea. And but Emil Volk, I mean, in this book, which I wrote with my friend Michael Evans in America, which is a history of from 1970 more or less to now, actually. There are many examples of some of the great performers. It's called the Joker, like in Playboy magazine, you have the Playmate. So I put this in this book as the Jokers, the star Jokers. And Emil is one of the Jokers from, I mean, he was already performing brilliantly in the 70s. Uh, and there's a few modern versions of those as well. A guy called Tuga, who now lives in France, but he's from Chile. He took me to Chile, first of all, the first time I was playing in there. He's brilliant in the street, absolutely amazing. And there are many different forms of clowning as well now, because now there's a lady called Claire from France, and she does very, very balletic kind of clown. Marika France from Germany, she worked with very modern dance groups, and she had trouble with her knee, so she got pushed into experimenting with clown. Now she's doing all kinds of beautiful stuff with classical music, clown, a very, very poetic kind of clown. And then you have, kind of crazy people who don't necessarily have any plan and they go out and do something really bizarre. Um, there's many kinds of clown now, and actually, the ones that make you laugh, maybe they're not so many, because I think a lot of people have there's a lot of comedy that's been presented, and I don't think it's funny anymore, necessarily, like kind of very certain kinds of comedy, which I think always works. And one of the things about Edinburgh, you mentioned Edinburgh. I was lucky when I was living in Edinburgh because the festival was completely different from what it became. Um, I directed my wife in a show for the street in Edinburgh, which didn't really work as well as it should have done. But I was amazed at how everything is about comedy now. It's like before Edinburgh had theater, music, orchestras, such a full range of culture. And all I could really see, what was mainly promoted was comedy, stand up, or you know, various forms of comedy, TV, comics, famous. That was never there in Edinburgh before. And for example, the Edinburgh review nights, the kind of late night shows, there was a lot of university in when I was being, in my kind of between, I suppose, 7, 8, 9 years old is the first years I started looking at things with my parents in Edinburgh. And there were people like Dudley Moore, Peter Cook, Monty Python people. They were all there as students performing comedy nights, you know, which, and later they became famous in BBC, as comedy series. Um, but it wasn't really, it wasn't really the same kind of situation as how the comedy has taken over the Edinburgh Festival.
Hmm. Well, it's a good thing that Corey's taking it. No, I'm joking. No, it's what you. There's lots of things that have been said about the Edinburgh Fringe now, and it's. I speak to a lot of comedians. I went there last year, and there's a lot of comedians that I know there that say that Edinburgh's finished, that it's getting too saturated, and there's so many complaints about the rent
Probably.
too much. Like performers can't afford. There's people that are paying 3,000s for the month in terms of just accommodation. The
Yeah, no,
prices are soaring and soaring. People
yeah,
know that the artists are desperate to make money. You get you get booked into a room at a certain time, which isn't really hospitable, really properly. It's you're getting
mm,
put in phone booths, and I speak to like performers in Europe when they talk about their own festivals, and they said that the festivals in Europe are way better. You get paid to do these festivals, whilst at Edinburgh Fringe you
yeah,
pay to perform, and you get performing a shitty audience, and it's a bit like it's all filled with a lot of artists that are because they've been told to do it. That it's a place where they all want to get famous, and then you've got all these
yeah.
people in Edinburgh taking advantage of them, and you have to spend so much money, and it's yeah,
Well,
I'm intrigued.
the Scottish people are very happy about, all the money they've made on people sleeping. I mean, that was, when I was young, a lot of the Scottish people were like, "Oh, we don't go to the festival because that's all those snobs that come up from England." Somebody's just come to my house. Sorry, hang on. I'll be right back. Okay.
No, it's I'll pause. Uh,
I think if you're going to go to Edinburgh as a performer, the first thing you have to learn is you're not going to make money, and you're going to spend money. And with luck, if you really play your cards right, you'll get seen. And you may therefore get a chance to play somewhere else, like in London, Liverpool, Birmingham, or wherever. But I would take it as a learning experience and really see more so that you really can see the people in the street, the kind of street comedy that's going on, and the way these guys work because they travel around the world playing, in China and Canada, wherever. If you're doing a comedy show, late night show or something, then I would suggest that you you see and study what they do and study what their themes are, study how they do their timing, if they're and watch for the ones that don't work well, so you can learn from how failure can actually happen, because not everybody has a success. There are some disasters, and that's part of anyway. I've found problems once or twice. Everybody has a bad show. Doesn't matter how good you are. In terms of in terms of success. Success can't happen every time. You might feel like you know drunk after a party and vomiting or whatever. You have 45-degree fever. Any of these things can happen and you'd still play the show, but it may not be very nice for you, but it might work, but it might not work. So you never know in a way. But these things have happened to me, so I know, not, you can't always be perfect. We're
and
not perfect beings. AI might be, I hope not.
now, to anyone that is listening right now, how do they find out about you, and what is one piece of advice that you would give to any comedian or clown out there?
Always be honest with yourself and be in touch with what's going on, because your life is connected to other lives, and anything that's in your life you can use. Always try and see the funny side or the other side of the tragedy, because that's where the comedy is. It's contrasting. And I think if you use stuff which you really experience yourself, that is the best base, because you know how to express that emotion that you had at the time of the problem. So, for example, if your car breaks down in the snow, like what's that happened to me? Oh man, pushing that car down with, well, actually, it was a big transit van, pushing it through a highway in Holland at midnight on a Saturday night um, with five other people who are all exhausted from playing in the performance. That happened to me once. And I could tell you that story. That already happened in 1975, but I could tell you I could tell you the whole night of what happened. I remember everything about it. So anything that you personally have, that's what you should deal with
Okay.
much more, and then you can move into other areas. But it's important to really live what you bring up and comment on what you actually experience.
Okay.
I think that's important.
And how do they find out about you? And
Well, like I just explained to you before, for some reason I have a website which is johnnymelville.com, but I'm also in Linktree, which is link.tree stroke Johnny Melville, and it's a very useful item for performers because you can put all your websites of social media on there. And so that's the easiest because then you can flick around and find me in Instagram or in Facebook or whatever. But johnnymelville.com, I hope, will be back online soon. Otherwise, just Google me. I'm around in lots of stuff. So you can Google me and get in touch. And I'll be doing a workshop in in Germany, South Germany, in July, the last 3 days of July. So if you want to come and do a course, that's a very nice place called Tamala Clown School in Constance on the sea, which borders Switzerland. And then in Barcelona in the week of the 20 to 25, I'll be teaching a masterclass in Barcelona for 3 days, which is 6 hours a day. And then I do a show. And in that clown festival, it's 40 years birthday. And I was at the first one, so I'm the only one left. All the others, like Jango, passed away last year, and Colombioni, they're dead, and Dimitri died also. So if you want to come and see a really good clown festival, that's a good place to come.
okay, so you know where to go, guys. I hope you've enjoyed Johnny, and hopefully I'll see you at the next episode. The next episode is going to be with clown director Dan Lees. But yeah, I'll see you guys soon.